So this is the third lecture recording for the Human Population Dynamic PowerPoint. So the first recording, I went over the science of demographics. The second recording was human population growth through time. Finally, we are going to look at human population and the environment. And I say human population rather than growth rate because we're going to look at the overall size of a population and consumption and how that affects the environment. So your learning objectives, you need to explain what the variables for what we call the IPAT equation are and how these determine the impact of the human population on the environment. You need to describe two major impacts that humans have on the environment. And finally, you're going to describe consumption trends and the effect that those have. So the first part is looking at the IPAT equation. Now, this is an equation that was put together by a scientist that looks at human populations. So basically, I stands for impact on the environment, referring to the impact that a population in a given area has on the environment. The P stands for population size, A stands for affluence or consumption. Affluent, remember, refers to the general wealth of a population, like how much money they have. And the T is technology. So here I put on the bottom, explain how population size, affluence and consumption, and technology affect human population impact on the environment. So basically, I want you to think about, trying to turn on my text box here, how you think these different elements affect the environment. So pause the video here and take a second and think about that. Okay, so hopefully you paused the video. So let's look at the different aspects of the IPAT equation. So population size. How do you think population size affects our impact on the environment? Well, a larger population can mean higher consumption, but it doesn't have to. So think about the US, we do not have the highest population. That goes to like areas of India and China. But people in the US consume a lot more than people in, say, India. So even though our population size is smaller, we consume more. So our impact would be very similar to the impact of another country with a higher population. So let's take a look at this. So population size, larger populations can have a greater impact on the environment. Okay, spread that out there. Okay, so it's a very complicated interaction, which is what I'm getting at. So population size, a larger population does not always mean higher impact, but it can mean higher impact. Now, affluence or consumption. So more affluent countries can have a greater impact on the environment. Okay, so why is that? Well, I should say higher, no, greater affluence, excuse my grammar here. Greater affluence means higher consumption. Okay, that's pretty much across the board. More affluence, we have more money, we buy more. And a lot of our purchases are on technology. Okay, So technology, again, I want to stress that this is a complicated relationship. So more use of technology can create more pollution and waste. It can also lead to more innovation regarding about taking care of the environment. Let me move this for you. Hopefully you can understand my text boxes all over the place here. Okay, so again, complicated relationship. Now, what I will most likely do for your quiz is give you a type of scenario, and you will have to apply the IPAT equation to the scenario to give me a general idea of what like the country's impact would be on the environment. So even though it's a complicated relationship, you need to be able to explain how these factors might work together, okay? And as with many of my short answer questions, there is not a definite right or a definite wrong answer. I just need to know that you can evaluate these different parts of the IPAT equation. Okay, so let's continue on. Okay, so now we're going to look at the actual impacts of human societies. And when I say human societies, we're generally going to refer to like countries, right? For this slide, however, I am looking at the whole of human society. So we have two major impacts on the environment. Our consumption patterns, how much we consume, and the waste that we produce lead us to deplete non-renewable resources like coal, petroleum or oil, and natural gas, right? We're using these up. And I know there are a variety of predictions regarding when we will run out of coal or oil. And they vary because you have to take into account different environmental factors. And so when people model this or look at it, maybe they have different variables going into their prediction. My point being, we're not exactly sure when we will run out of these non-renewable resources, but we have to start planning for it. Now, still on number one there, still on the same factor. Not only do we deplete or use up our non-renewables, we use our renewable resources at a rate that does not allow them to replenish. So let's take a forest, for instance. We cut down wood at such a rapid rate that even if we replant trees, they do not have time to grow and make an ecosystem, some kind of replacement ecosystem, before we cut them down again. Okay, so things like trees, what would be another one? How about soil, right? Soil will take in more nutrients, replenish itself, but if we grow crops year after year after year, we do not give the soil enough chance to regenerate or become healthy again. So we are using these renewable resources at such a rapid rate that they can't regenerate, they can't renew themselves. Now, the second factor, or the second way that we have an impact on the environment, is we emit waste into the environment. And a lot of this comes from our consumption. So these two impacts are tied together, but we release air and water pollutants. Like for instance, paper factories are huge, huge polluters. They dump all of their chemicals into waterways like chlorine. Okay, if you get white paper, a lot of it has been bleached with chlorine that is then released into the environment. You can actually buy paper that is not bleached. So also air pollutants like driving vehicles can cause smog. And you guys all live in Phoenix, guys and girls. I don't know why I say you guys. Most of you live, or all of you live in Phoenix, and so you're familiar with our smoggy days. Right now, we're not as bad as some places, but our pollution is not great. And a lot of that comes from vehicle combustion. And so driving is emitting a lot of air pollutants. One other, actually, I'm going to go on to toxic materials. So a lot of our factories and plants that manufacture goods release a ton of chemicals into the environment. Now we're even finding in like rivers, highly toxic chemicals that even though we don't use them anymore, they were put into barrels and thrown into the bottom of these riverways, and they're leaking. We have seen evidence of these chemicals in our waterways. And a lot of these cannot be taken out of our drinking water. And the barrels can't be brought up because that would release even more of this toxic material. Greenhouse gases, right? This is waste. And when we talk about climate change, you will see that there are more greenhouse gases than just carbon dioxide. But carbon dioxide is released into our environment when we do things like burn coal for energy. And then finally, excess nutrients. Now, you probably don't know what that means, but an example, so we have what we call the Corn Belt, right? Midwest. Tons of people grow corn. Now, a lot of this is off the Mississippi River. Corn requires a ton of fertilizers. And hopefully you remember from our biogeochemical cycles that the nitrogen cycle, nitrogen is in fertilizers. Nitrogen runs off into the Mississippi River. So what does that do? That's actually not a good thing. Nitrogen is a nutrient for plants and algae. Algae is not a plant, by the way. I think I told you that before. So excess nitrogen in the water causes huge algal growth, right? Tons of algae to grow. Now this causes what's called a dead zone. Okay, so first of all, the growth of, say, algae attracts fish and other organisms, and they start feeding on it. They create a lot of waste. The waste falls to the bottom of the ocean, in this case, where bacteria consume it. Now, if you remember from a previous lecture, when you consume food, it is for cellular respiration. Well, that counts for bacteria as well. So they consume this waste, they start using it, start going through cell respiration, and that means they use oxygen, right? You need oxygen to do cell respiration. That's why we breathe it in. Well, they use up all the oxygen in the water. So all those fish and marine organisms that came in to feed on that algae, they're going to die because there's not enough oxygen in the water. That is why we call it a dead zone. And that has affected our fisheries throughout the country. And there's more than one dead zone. There's a huge dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, but they're actually all over the world, right? Because every country uses nitrogen fertilizers. So just to summarize here, the two major impacts that human populations have on the environment are consumption patterns, how we use up resources, but also the waste that we produce. Air and water pollutants, toxic materials, greenhouse gases, and excess nutrients. And then I put a picture here, land conversion for grazing in the Amazon forest. Hopefully you all heard about these huge fires in the Amazon. Well, those were started because so many people were going into the forest and doing this slash and burn agriculture where they burn down the vegetation so they can plant crops. And keep in mind, though, that these are never black and white issues, right? It's not like the Amazonians or whatever are, actually it's Brazilians. That was a error, right? Mostly Amazon's in Brazil. So you might want to think, okay, these are really bad people. They're going in and burning the Amazon rainforest. But keep in mind, these people are very poor. How do you feed your family, right? If you had a choice of going in and burning down some of the forest so that you could feed your family, think about what choice you would make, right? So these are never black and white issues when it comes to resource use and environmental conservation. Okay, so the next few slides are going to show you consumption patterns. Okay, so remember what I said about consumption. So let's look at this. This graph right here is looking at global spending, and most of this is directed towards consumption. So consumption increases with spending. Wealthier countries consume more goods. So from 1970 to 2018, global spending increased a huge amount. I put 25-fold, right? So increase 25 times. 25 times over the original amount. So global average per capita spending increased from $600 in 1970 to $7,800 in 2018. So that's like the amount of money each person spends. It's an average. Okay, so we see that spending is increasing, which increases consumption. Now, these are types of consumption. What we have found is that the wealthier a country is, the more animal products it consumes. So raising cattle or animals for consumption is hugely damaging to the environment. It uses up tons of land and water. You are giving water to the actual animals, but it takes water to grow the food that the animals are going to eat. Currently, 80 billion animals are slaughtered each year for consumption. So I found this chart on the right or left here pretty interesting. So this looks at the different types of animals that are consumed in a few of the countries here. So I selected the countries I wanted to display. Now, Portugal consumes a lot of animal products, primarily seafood. Australia is one of the biggest meat consumers in the world. So they consume a lot of poultry, a lot of beef, and what else do we have here? Pork. Now, the US is almost the same as Australia. We consume a lot of poultry. So we have been shifting from red meat to like chicken and pork. And then it has, I put on the graph, like Argentina, Brazil, China. So if you look here, China consumes far fewer animals than we do. And Kenya is way down there, India even less. Okay, now this comes from Our World in Data, and this is fully updated. Well, this says 2017, but if you go on the website, Our World in Data, most of this goes through 2020. So we are consuming more animal products than any time in history. As countries get wealthier, they consume more animal products. Now let's look at freshwater use. There was a six-fold increase in global freshwater use between 1901 and 2014. Now that is related to human population size, of course. So as their number of people increase, freshwater use also increases. And there's several reasons for that. Agriculture, right? We need to produce more food, that takes more water. industry and municipal use means like in cities. Now, what is the problem with freshwater consumption? Well, remember from the water cycle information, not much of the water on Earth is freshwater, and all of us depend on freshwater to survive, right? So as we increase freshwater use, it is not the same across countries. So in this picture here, this is picturing Africa. Women walk like 6 kilometers every single day to get water and bring it back to their families. And this is the job of women and girls, right? Girls are not going to school in a lot of these areas. They are obtaining water every day. And a lot of people are running out of water. There are whole cities running out of water. I think it was Cape Town in South Africa ran out of water. And so they had to bring in water from other areas in bottles. People were only allowed to shower for a few minutes once a week, and then water was rationed. Also, in a lot of places, people have to boil their water because of diseases, waterborne diseases. Now, I told you that I just watched a news story on this. Apparently, there are areas in this country where people have been boiling their water for years. One area has been boiling water for 6 years because it's unsanitary. And this is located mostly in minority areas. So the other problem with this, obviously, is as we deplete freshwater sources, there's nothing left for the plants and animals in an area. So that can destroy ecosystems. Here I'm looking at energy use, again, decreasing across the globe. And this is from 2020. Although it looks like my graph only goes to 2017. So there's been a really big increase in energy use. Again, as populations grow, more people are consuming energy. So what is the issue with this? Is we are depleting our non-renewable resource, right? Like coal. Also, coal is a very, very dirty way of generating energy. It emits air pollutants and greenhouse gases into our environment, which is contributing to global warming. So now, if you look at this, this is a great opportunity to start implementing renewable energy sources. Now, it'll take a combination of methods for generating energy in every place. I've heard a lot of, well, there's not enough sunlight in an area for solar panels to work. There's not enough wind for windmills. It's going to take a combination of these sources, but we have to start switching to renewables because at some point, non-renewables will not be an option. Finally, these are a little bit dated, but the statistics still hold. So this slide is looking at human consumption patterns and how these have led to a decrease in wild animal populations. And here it's not just consumption, but also population size. So you can see in my graph on the top left, I believe the red line is extinction. Oh, I see, it's a double axis here. So on the y-axis on the left, it's vertebrate extinctions. On the y-axis on the right, and that's sideways, it's population, human population. So as our population grows, the number of extinctions grows. Okay, and you might remember from an earlier lecture, I talked about the 6th mass extinction. That's what we are currently in, and it is human caused. So if you look at the lower image on the left-hand side, this is showing you that human population has increased, it's doubled, right? Increased by 100% almost. Whereas animal populations have been cut almost in half. They have decreased. It says 60%. It's actually closer to 50%. So human population doubles, wild animal populations have gone down by 50%. And then finally, on the right, on the bottom, weight of vertebrate land animals. So all this is showing you is that in 10,000 years ago, only 1% of living organisms on land were humans, 98% wild animals. Now, oops, it is 32% humans, 1% wild animals, and then you have 67% livestock. So we are using all this land that belonged to wild animals at one point and grazing our cattle, raising pigs, raising chickens. So this is my last slide, but one thought I want to leave you with is that if you decrease your consumption of animal products on a weekly basis, you are making a huge contribution to conserving the environment. Now, I'm not saying be a vegetarian or a vegan, but if you just decrease your consumption 1 or 2 days a week, you are making a big difference for the environment. So I'll leave you with that. This is the last lecture recording for this PowerPoint.